and welcome to What the Fringe, the podcast dedicated to all things Fringe theater. I'm your host, Lauren Hantz, and each week I visit with a Fringe artist to hear all about their endeavors and gain insight into their process. This week I'm visiting with Linnea Bond of Heart Ripped Out Twice, and So Can You. Orlando Weekly says, if Amy Sedaris and Jane Lynch had a baby who became the world's most intense timeshare salesperson, they would still probably wouldn't be half as arresting as Linnea Bond in Heart Ripped Out Twice and So Can You. This multi-award-winning show is mostly a comedy about pain. An enthusiastic sales representative pitches you on existence, but the darker realities of life keep pushing through her carefully constructed presentation, not to mention phone calls that make this sale personal. Written after a harrowing health journey and devastating breakup, Linnea wonders, is it worth it?
I try to be positive and I try to hold all of the truths at the same time, but it feels like things are getting worse. So my project has kind of been how can I invite people at the end of this emotional experience into action? You're sitting here in a theater and you're experiencing all of these different feelings. I mean, maybe you hated the play, who knows? But how can I use that moment to invite people to go beyond, okay, now I'm aware, because most people are aware of climate change, but that I have actions that I can take. I have agency to participate in the fight against climate change and all the other things like extractive capitalism and oppression of lots of different people groups. How can I participate actively beyond voting, beyond, every 4 years? And it doesn't have to be if you're not necessarily comfortable being in the streets or whatever, but how can you plug into the work that other people are already doing, the path that other people have already laid? So I do, when I go to Fringe festivals in places that I don't live, I try to connect with organizers who are working in the area. So I have a slide presentation in my show, so at least I put up a QR code to connect with those people.
Linnea Bond is a Philly-based performance artist, activist, and teacher exploring apocalypse and renewal on a personal, interpersonal, and global scale. She works in the intersection of sociology and storytelling, designing communal, immersive, invitational, and other live action events along a spectrum of traditional and non-traditional live performance, and artistic activism primarily related to the climate crisis. She has been touring Heart Ripped Out Twice and So Can You nationally and internationally since its Cannonball Philly Fringe premiere in 2022, and will be performing next off-Broadway at the Soho Playhouse this spring. In addition to her devising work and stage acting, she has also worked as a director, dramaturg, and playwright, and as an actor in the Todd Haynes films Carol and Dark Waters. Linnea, welcome to What the Fringe!
Oh my gosh, Lauren, thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad you're here. So we got connected. We met at the Minnesota Fringe, but I had heard about your show beforehand because I was creeping on the Cincy Fringe website, and I remember seeing your show in particular on that lineup that year, and I was like, that looks really interesting. And then when I saw you're coming to Minnesota, I was like, I want to meet this chick.
It's so cute that you said that because I was excited by your picture because Holio has a vibrator on it, and I was like, I think this is for me.
It is for you. It's definitely for you.
We had crushes on each other before we met.
See, I love it. And we still have crushes. I met you and my crush just grew is kind of what happened. So I'm super excited to be here with you and that you're on the program.
Oh, thanks. You were saying that everybody hates listening to their bio, and I don't hate listening to all of my accomplishments because like scars, I'm like, this is what I've earned. But I was laughing really hard because I was like, I've definitely written my bio like a grant application. The first, think about your audience. My first sentence is so heavy granty language. So that's a note for me.
That's so great. Well, I feel like more of us should embrace that idea, myself included. I'm going to preach to myself here of enjoying those positive things being said about us and celebrating, like you're saying, yeah, I did that. That's who I am. And to not be ashamed about it. It's not a cockiness. It's just pride in your work and who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
So you are classically trained actor, and then you kind of got into clowning. So tell me just a bit about your artistic journey, just from going from acting to clowning.
I mean, to really start early, my mom is a storyteller. I grew up with my mom, she would learn stories in books and then she would stand up and tell them like in my like elementary classes, like, and she is a teacher. So I sort of like always had that like solo performer, folk storyteller like style that I grew up like knowing. And again, like you don't know your frame of reference. You don't know that other people don't get that, you know? So yeah, I guess I came from that. And my dad is kind of a wacko, I guess. He's a pediatrician. And so like, he's just very like child oriented, always like funky ties. So I don't know. I guess I think that there was like a sense of like, this is what an actor is supposed to be. And like, I did like want to be on stage in sort of a like traditional theater sense. It is a lot less work, I think, in some ways to be like cast in a show that's already written and then just like go get to do your job. And I still actually like long for that. I wasn't getting cast. Like I was auditioning. So I was living in Cincinnati and then I went to grad school for my MFA and I was hoping that I would get more work if I went and got my MFA. But I got the only school I got into was Ohio State. They have an acting with an emphasis on new works and devising program. And so I came out of that. I kind of went in being like, all right, well, I really just want to act, but I guess I'll like do this. But I was kind of interested in writing. And then, I came out and I still wasn't getting as much work. I just moved to Philadelphia in part because it's such a devising scene. And I did fall in love with devising more when I was in school, like both, collaborative devising and then also solo writing. Our final project is to write a solo show. So then I moved to Philadelphia because a lot of reasons. It's affordable. I pay $5.88 in rent and I live downtown. It's got like an awesome clown scene. Pig Iron is here. So they're turning out students who are trained in devising every year. And they went through the ringer last year with the shutdown of University of the Arts, which some people may have heard of. But anyway, so and then there's also Headlong. There was a lot of other like institutions that are devising oriented. So moving here and getting more into that scene, I still didn't get like cast. And as I was trying to build, I was cast in 2 shows and then the pandemic hit. So I was sort of like, all right, I'm giving up on this really. Like, I don't really go into auditions anymore. And then I was just mostly focused on writing my own stuff. And that turn was kind of happening already, but I hadn't really sort of like given up on auditioning. And now I'm like, it's funny because like sometimes I get called in because people see my solo show and they like see me more, and I think that's true of a lot of people. You kind of have to cast yourself before other people want to cast you. I know Class Actress, this musician, she wasn't getting cast in New York. And then she basically invented this character that she plays on stage as a musician. So that's what I do now. Now I was kind of writing something that was sort of stand-up-y. And the last show I had written in grad school that it was like this 20-minute solo show was a clown show. And that's because I studied the previous summer at Pig Iron. They do a 3-week course. And the last thing you do is clown, red-nosed clown. So I came back and that was inspiration for my solo show where I play the last millennial on Earth and her mannequin best friend. And at the end of the show, I actually I find a blow up doll in the process of the show. And then we have a girls' night because we have 3 of us. And then at the end, I leave the mannequin and I take the blow up doll and I, say, I'm not leaving you because, she's more convenient because she's easier to blow up and all these things. But because you're not my friend who I lost because there was a sickness, I sort of revealed. All that is to say, clown became like, oh, this is comfortable for me in a way. So in writing this show, I didn't really want to write another clown show, but I wrote a bunch of jokes and sort of stand up. And then as I was talking to people about it, it became like, what is the relationship to the audience? And then I was like, I think I'm just going to make another clown show because that's kind of easy. Or it just was the thing that was kind of within reach, the solution to the problems I was experiencing with the show. Well, it was actually a suggestion of my ex-boyfriend / collaborator from grad school, who's a much better writer than I am. He said, what if the whole show is a bad timeshare sales pitch? And what if instead of saying I the whole show, you say you? And I was like, well, thanks. You just solved the whole show. So I then went back and wrote the play. And I mean, most of the meat was already there, but it was basically the beginning of setting up the world. And then I had something to sort of hang my coat on and playing this very clear character and having like a structure to it. Shout out to Blake Edwards for his great ideas that I totally stole.
See, that's great. But we need those people around us to support us. And I mean, you did that work. And I feel like if you talk to anybody who's done a solo show, they've got those handful of people that said, well, why don't you try this and this? And there it is. Like when I was developing my show with Amelia, I don't know where my ideas start and end and hers start and end. It was just such a, collaborative project. So, but you wrote it and you do it. So it's your baby.
I wanted a director And I wanted to like do more devising with other people in the writing process, but I just didn't have like consistent people I was able to work with. Like my sort of collaborators were really busy. And so I wrote a bunch, and then like I read it to my brother and sister-in-law, who are also both performers and directors. And they were like, who's the audience? And I was like, I know. And then I like read it, I sent it to Blake. I sent it to another friend, Maura, who's also a writer. And I performed like a draft in front of somebody, and they gave me some feedback. So it was very like it was sort of, I heard that there are some cultures that believed that like a baby is not born from one father, that they get the best. They had like sex with multiple men in a row. And then they were like, the child will be the best qualities of all of these men. Like sperm was like cumulative. And that's kind of how this show was created. It was like, it was obviously the mother, but there was a lot of fathers.
I love that. That's a good analogy. I haven't heard that story before. That's great though. But it feels like that. And sometimes that's how our art is, especially as solo artists, because it's rare when you find someone who cares about your project as much as you do. We're just thankful for anybody that will give us time. And even though if you didn't have a director, it's very clear that there was a lot of like thought that went into the show, and how it was put together, very well constructed. And it was one of the things that I was going to mention about your show. We'll kind of move into your show is I thought the writing was absolutely brilliant. I got one tooed at the end. Like I wasn't expecting that, the baby's being born and there's trouble. And when I think about you and I think about your show, I literally think about this twist at the end and how beautifully the show is written from the top to the end. It's just very carefully thought out and a huge strength of your show. I don't know if people have written about that, but from one writer to another, it's very evident.
Yeah, definitely that people are like, oh, it's a huge, and I love like, Martin was talking about this when you interviewed him. Like I saw one of Martin's shows early on when I was living in Cincinnati after I had written my first play, and it was in the Fringe and it was awful. And he was there with his partner and they performed the show that he had written. And it was like, it's a, package that keeps opening. It's like the Russian doll of like revelation. And I was like, it just was so impactful. I was like, I want to write like that. And this show, I think, scratches at that a little bit. So I'm very inspired by that idea of revelation. And I'm glad I was able to do that with the show, because it can be tricky, but I think it works. I've gotten feedback that it works.
100% it works. It kind of gets me. Like when I think about it, I'm like, wow. And just the ending of like, what I felt was like, stuff is hard, but it's worth it. Like life is worth it. Come out, little baby. And
should we just reveal the whole thing so that people have context for what we're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. Give us like a quick down and dirty of the show.
Yeah, really, really quick. So I play a sales representative selling the audience on existing. The audience is memoryless energies between death and either rebirth or nirvana. I'm trying to sell you on being reborn. This is the elevator pitch, by the way. And so we all, when we're talking to people, we have to know what to say. This is the elevator pitch that I say literally every time I have it memorized. But I keep accidentally talking about all the bad parts about being alive. Usually I stop there. Sometimes if I know they're not going to see the show, I go on. During the show, I destroy my phone at the beginning because it keeps interrupting me before I start talking. And then later on, another phone rings, and it is my brother who is telling me that his wife is in labor and that there's complications. So it's this thing that pokes into the world that it doesn't fit within the world. And through the show, there's this constant mask slipping where I'm playing this sales representative. And then you realize that I'm actually something else. And then at the end of the show, as the pain has accelerated, as the show is more and more of a fiasco, but it's actually like, in some fiascos are comedic. This becomes less comedic in a way as it goes on. And I'm realizing that I'm revealing so much about pain and the pain of being alive that the audience is going to not be born. And my brother calls a final time, and they're going in for a C-section because the cord is wrapped around the baby's neck. And this actually happened. My sister-in-law did have a C-section because the cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. And this image to me really stuck out as like, as a baby is finding out about the world, they are like, no, I'm out. I'm not coming out. I'm not coming into this world. I'm going to end it. And honestly, like, there's a part of me that gets worried about like women who have had miscarriages seeing the show, because I imagine that could hit a visceral nerve. That's not what the show is about, but it's one of those things that you can't protect people from, and they might have had that experience. And like, I just have to sort of let that go. But at the end, I am begging the child, despite everything, to be born, because actually life is worth it. Just the existence and joy of being alive is worth it, even with all the pain, and I talk about climate change as part of that. And I wrote the show because I was feeling so in despair when my friends would tell me that they were having babies and I wasn't happy for them. And so I was like, oh, I'm totally hopeless. So how can I reach toward hope? And so the show is basically a ritual in a way of me reaching toward hope. And I think that a lot of people in the audience are struggling with hope. And so when at the end I'm trying to say it's worth it, people have really responded to that.
All of that comes through so beautifully. And I see you like getting emotional, and you get so emotional in the show. We're going to get to that in a second. But like as a mother myself, I resonated with that. Having lost a baby, I didn't go through as much emotion like as some people do, or just as my own journey. But just the beauty in the ending. I mean, you are just drenched in tears at this point and telling people that life is worth it. And it was like one of the most beautiful, breathtaking things that I've seen, and realizing that the phone at the top of the show is this baby. You know, it's like I felt like it's like this baby's calling. And it's like, should I do it? Should I not? And you're like, it sucks, but yes, it's great. And it is full of hope and beauty. And so, yeah, it's just a gorgeous show. And again, well thought out. So I want to talk about that emotionality of it.
I feel like I am about to cry most of the time these days. And I wonder, too, if it's like a kind of, when you're an actor or when you're working on something very emotional, it's just like your sort of your job is to keep it on the surface in a way, because if you push it too much down, then it's not accessible. But yeah, I do feel like, I don't know, I'm worried I've rehearsed the sadness a little too much. So like there's a process just trying to just stay really present with the actual feeling in the moment.
There's a balance of that, or kind of like different schools of thought, if you will, like some people are like fully invest, go for it, wreck yourself every time. And then the other school of thought is learn how to communicate that and separate yourself from it and learn how to replicate that for the benefit of the audience. And so, and I'm like, I think it's just each actor's kind of personal opinion on how they like to go. But do you get to that point every time in the show where you're just sobbing?
Pretty much. Because I wrote something that I feel really deeply. So like every time I'm saying it, I think that's the joy of writing your own work. Like, and of course things become, I think you can write something and it can become crusty for you over time. That's totally a thing that happens. But for me, with doing this show, and maybe it's because I I'm not doing it like a Broadway run. I'm not doing 8 shows a week, but like I do, a festival and then I take time off. But like, it does feel like it's easy for me to be really present with it, with the material, with the words I've written.
That's beautiful. It comes across in every performance. I mean, the one I saw, so I can imagine they're all like that. Well, let's talk about climate change just a little bit, because that is kind of part of the show. And it's something that you personally feel passionate about. And it's just a small portion of your show, but it is something at the end of your show, you do have an opportunity to have a platform to talk to people and ask them to check some things out. So just give me a little snapshot of your feelings about that. And then we'll go into kind of the connection to Fringe.
I started working as a client, volunteering, I guess, as a climate organizer. And now I do have a job as a climate organizer. I'm very lucky in that way. In 2018, I went to and I always, I come from a sociology background, and my parents are very social justice oriented. So I was raised within that world. But I didn't really think that it was an issue that affected people. I know this might sound dumb, to some people, but I also think that some people haven't had that context awareness either. But I remembered that they were talking about the International Panel on Climate Change's report that we had to have emissions by 2025, which, by the way, is this year. And we had to get emissions to zero by 2050 if we were going to avoid more than 1.5 degrees of global warming. This was the report that came out. And that information was hard. But the reality, then, they say this, predictions were that Kolkata in India would be too hot to breathe by 2050. And that information was so big for me to take in, and I guess like cracked open my empathy and my awareness that this was not just about the trees. This is about people. And I think I've moved away from understanding the world in that way, or trying to think about like how interrelated, all of nature is, all of life is. There's not like necessarily a hierarchy of humans to, planets and stuff, but there is like sometimes privilege in that too, because some people are like, you don't even understand my, I'm struggling with food insecurity or something. So like, don't talk to me about whales when I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills, which is real. But of course, those people are also going to be the most and first affected by climate change. So as we know, India is the second most populated country in the world. Kolkata is I don't know how many people live in Kolkata, but it's a lot more than New York. So it's like, yeah, I think about how that's going to affect those people and how vulnerable those people are too. Most of those people are far more poor than most of us. I've been reading this book called Factfulness, which is sort of like updating our mindset from like developing world to like understanding that like there's actually a big spectrum, and like a lot of poor countries are now like middle income countries in a way to think about it. So to complicate it even further, but to return to climate change, I've been feeling very emotional about all of that. And again, I've been wondering like, do you like pile, grief statements and like these big statements on the audience, like the Kolkata is going to be too hot to breathe, or like all of the extinctions that are likely to happen in the next however many years, or what has happened, or like, I wrote this piece in response to the hopelessness that I felt about all of that, and wanting to, the piece is about pain. It's about the pain that I experienced with having a bunch of medical stuff, but ultimately I wrote it because I felt hopeless. And so that's the place that I get to at the end. I've processed my physical pain of the surgeries, and I've processed this breakup. I mean, in some ways we don't speak, and I actually really miss him as a friend. The climate change is the stuff that I'm in. And it's, of course, like the grief over everything in life. It feels like things are getting worse. I try to be positive and I try to like hold all of the truths at the same time, but it feels like things are getting worse. So my project has kind of been like, how can I invite people at the end of this emotional experience into action? You're sitting here in a theater and you're experiencing all of these different feelings. I mean, maybe you hated the play, who knows? But how can I use that moment to invite people to go beyond, okay, now I'm aware, like, because most people are aware of climate change, but that I have actions that I can take. I have agency to participate in the fight against climate change and all the other things like extractive capitalism and oppression of lots of different people groups. Like, how can I participate actively beyond voting, beyond, every 4 years? And it doesn't have to be like, if you're not necessarily comfortable being in the streets or whatever, but like, how can you plug into the work that other people are already doing, the path that other people have already laid? So I do, when I go to Fringe festivals in places that I don't live, I try to connect with organizers who are working in that area. So I have a slide presentation in my show. So at least I put up a QR code to connect with those people. If they're, we're in a Fringe show, you're running against the clock. It's 60 minutes. My piece is kind of 62 minutes. If I really get to do it at the speed that I want to do it at. So I have at some points been able to say something after the show, like talking about there is stuff that we can do, because it does end a little bit hopeless about climate change. It's hopeful about life, but I do worry a little bit that I leave like the coffin closed on climate change. And so that's like a writing question that I have. I probably won't change the writing, but I do kind of wonder if I should end it differently. But I do, give people something to do.
You did so good, though, because you tied it back in. I wanted to make sure you got a chance to speak about that, because I know it's something that's very like near and dear to your heart, and things that we need to be made aware of. And, my belief is that theater makers are seers, that they see what's going on in the world in a very special way. And they want either, theater makers were either reflecting back to the world the way that it is, or we're giving a glimpse into the future of how it could be or how it might be, positive or negative. And I think Fringe in particular is lent even more so to those types of people, because it is so much of this new work people doing their own thing. They're doing it because they're passionate about it. And so many shows, particularly clown, has this kind of deeper meaning that it's getting at, of something that it's actually trying to say. And I think you bring up a good point of like, how do we take that further, a step further beyond the theater, and help engage people and invite them into this work? Like, I just kind of wonder, I'm putting this out there in the ether to the Fringe festival people, of like shows that have something that they want to say, of having panel discussions, or, you know, something where we can get a little bit deeper, or giving opportunities for artists to have a talk back space for that. I know that things are already compressed and we've got to move our show out and get the next show in and that kind of thing, but making it part of the community of like, hey, if you do actually really care about this, I'm going to be at the Fringe bar tonight or whatever, come find me. Like, I really want to talk about it. You know, those kinds of things of trying to not just celebrate the art that we're making, but the passions that we have in our hearts of why we're making the art and what we want people to see and do because of it. It's just, you know, a really unique, special opportunity.
Right. And I mean, I'm not necessarily a fan of like the issue play, you know, like it's right. We're trying to tell stories. We're trying to change hearts. But I do think that while people are there and they're thinking about something, being able to plug people deeper into a community is really important. So it's tough because, you know, I end my show and people are in this sort of deeply emotional place, and I don't want to like go into logistics mode. But I also do want to take that moment to invite people to take the feelings they're feeling and go to a more active place.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about Fringe and goals. You've done quite a few. You've been touring this show to quite a few Fringes, and you have different goals kind of for each one. And so talk to me kind of about, obviously, your goals. We've heard the show kind of processing and talking about climate change and all of those things, but like kind of tangible artistic goals, like logistical goals, if you will. So walk me through that journey and yeah, what you kind of think about that.
I feel like a lot of the people you've talked to that I've listened to have been touring a lot. And I've toured one show a lot, but it's not like I've been touring for like 10 to 15 years. I started touring with this show and I'm at 2.5 years now. That's context for like, I didn't really know how to tour. And I think just like you talked about that. And I listened to that episode where you talk about your show and you're like, you had to sort of figure it out like we all do. And that's why you made this podcast, which thank you very much. I was trying to, learn how to do that. So Philadelphia has a huge Fringe. We were talking about this before. It's about like more than 300 shows. So it's the largest festival, I think, by show, but the audiences are smaller than other festivals like, you know, Edmonton or Winnipeg. So I did premiere it here, which felt really comfortable, home base. You know, in a way, I kind of wrote it for the space I was in because I was able to go to that space. I knew where like the projector was going to be, for example. And so I staged around that, which, you know, becomes its own complication. But it's important to have tent poles to put in the ground in order to move forward at all. So I knew that I needed to like get the touring of the show under me. And when I did the show here, I didn't have a director, and I did feel like when I did it the first night, it was like a little hectic. And I feel like slowly getting the show underneath me in like a rehearsal sense. But there was also the like, you know, every time I get to a new space, I have to reconfigure my show for the space because I have a lot of props. I have like a significant set and I have projection, which is, and I spill water on the floor. So there's like just technically, like if I can give performers any advice, it's like don't write a technically complicated show with a lot of stuff and like needs for space. Like I get why people like Martin, right? They're like, I'm just going to tell a story on stage and I can do it in a 2x2 and whatever. Good for you. I understand that now, and that's probably the best idea. But that's not the show I wrote. I have a 6-foot table and projection, and I use a small backstage area, and then I have a lot of props that come out of lots of different places. The actual like moving stuff from place to place was very complicated. What do I need in each space? Does every space have projection? Every festival I had to figure out, do they have all these things I need? So the process of basically like making the checklist of questions to ask, it was best to start at smaller festivals and build that up before I got to a big one like Orlando. So I sort of designed a tour, and I don't even know if I like designed it this way or I sort of like just lucked out, but I premiered it here, and then actually like they invited me to do it again. The Cannonball Festival, which is a festival within the Fringe Festival, produced it again we have our Fringe in September. They did it again in December. And then in March, I went to Asheville. In April, I went to Virginia Beach. So Asheville was 2 shows. Virginia Beach is 1 show. And then after that, I went to Orlando, Cincinnati. And then I flew and did a co-pro in Seattle at 18th and Union, if people are looking into something. Lovely space, lovely people. So I had to, because I have so much stuff, I had to like drive it. So like that was also part of it. Like, I didn't fly right away, it was figuring out how to get stuff in the car. Where do I transport it? So those 2 smaller festivals early on were great because I got to learn the process of all the production stuff and especially like arrival and tech. And what do I need to know about that? When it was, they're small. I'm not saying like low stakes or like they don't matter. It was just,
it's a shorter festival. You only do a handful of shows, and it gives you that experience that you need to go, oh, this is what I don't know.
When you have like a festival where you're going to like Orlando, when you're going to have like 5 or 6 shows, you might go back there and you're trying to like kind of build an audience. So like being able to feel really confident in your presentation of your show is a real gift. So being able to like get the touring under me was really helpful. And I could try things out sort of at those earlier festivals and figure out like, am I marketing in a way that takes up too much energy? Is it worth it? And the whole process is experimentation, but it was nice to be like, okay, I talked to a bunch of people at a bar. They're not interested. They're not going to like, sometimes people show up when you are at a bar and you're talking to some people and they've never heard of the Fringe Festival, but it's often a waste of your energy if you have limited energy, which you often do at Fringes. So that was a lesson that I learned. I was like, okay, I like put on my costume in the middle of like the town. Is that worthwhile? I don't know. Again, if you have limited resources, maybe not. So that was a useful process.
Yeah, that's really wise to know too, like when you're going somewhere, what you're getting out of it, or just to reflect back on it afterwards and know like, oh, this is what I learned from that. And that really helps us with our kind of like goal setting and expectations. So
yeah, and really you have to also look at like cost, and it's not just like how much is the festival, like does the festival provide housing or not? Because then you're finding your own housing. I had to rent a car. So like, because I don't have a car and I had so many props. So like it was very expensive for me to go to Orlando and then to Cincinnati. I paid about $1,000 to rent a car for those festivals. So it wasn't just the cost. I wasn't making stuff back for the most part. In Orlando, I definitely didn't make it back, which people had told me like, you definitely will. And that wasn't my experience, but I made money in Cincinnati. So yeah, you kind of have to like weigh it out, and it's a matter of what you're able to do, in terms of like, I am lucky because I have kind of a job that I'm able to make my money here and then tour. Some people are like, no, I tour 100% of the time. And so they have to make choices about what they're going to do in a different way,
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Well, let's end. This has been so lovely to chat with you today. And I always like to end with this very kind of fun or silly question, but what has been your most interesting or awkward or profound Fringe interaction?
So the first thing that sticks out to me, I was like trying to think of a funnier story, but I think this is like a really good teachable story, which is that when I premiered my show in Philly, I'm not a builder. I'm not a designer / maker of physical things. And I built my tumor costume, which is also a quick change costume. So I go from like my dress into like this tumor costume within like 10 seconds. And then I dance in it. And what I built looked to someone like a fat suit, and they were deeply offended. And first off, it was not a clear costume. Like it wasn't, some people didn't know that I was a tumor. That's obviously a big problem. But when someone like sends you a message after the show and was like, I loved the show until you were dancing in front of me in a fat suit. And you're like, obviously my heart was broken. And I tried to, I don't think that I had 0% defensive, but I hope that I had a minimal amount of defensiveness. I'm really trying to be like let me receive that feedback. I really appreciate you being vulnerable with me to share that with me. What do you think? If I'm open to suggestions, if you think there's something I could do better. And she did provide those things. She sent me some pictures of costumes that look less like the body. And I did try to think about, and then I built something that went over my head. So it was basically a padded out dress to because I was trying to create something that looked sort of bulbous, like a tumor. Then I built something after that goes over my head and just takes a much larger shape. But it was hard to figure out what I wanted to do. But in any case, all that is to say, hopefully, sometimes you encounter difficult feedback that's actually really painful to receive because you're I didn't intend that, I feel a little exposed and, whatever. But I think that that's going to happen probably to all of us at some point, and just try to be as gracious as you can and think let me receive it and, edit and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, it's just one of those things, it happens and you're crap, that was not my intention.
Not my intention, but that's what was received. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you for the feedback. And I hear you loud and clear, friend. I've got to go back to the drawing board, and that's why we do some of these festivals, to get those, that's in your hometown. You're going to have people that are a little bit more gentle, or, not gentle, but she felt comfortable enough to email you and then have a dialogue with you. That's really beautiful that your patron was able to do that and really help you as an artist. And
I was honestly really lucky that she was willing to come out to me in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you handled it really beautifully. You spoke with her, you guys talked, and she gave you advice. It's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on What the Fringe. It was such a delight to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
You're so welcome. All right. Well, you can catch Heart Ripped Out Twice, and so can you, off-Broadway at the Soho Playhouse, playing April 25th and 26th and May 2nd and 3rd. And then it will be playing in the Winnipeg Fringe Festival this summer. And please keep up with Linnea and also join her in her environmental justice actions. You can check stuff out on her Instagram at Linnea Bond. That's LINNEA.Bond, BOND. What the Fringe is produced and hosted by me, Lauren Hantz. This episode was edited by Ben Ellis of Renowned Media. Those sweet tunes you hear are provided by Paul Snyder of Orchestra of Sound, and our logo was designed by Ruby Arnold of Ruby Makes Things. What the Fringe can be found on your favorite podcast platforms and now on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know when new episodes release. Keep up with What the Fringe on Instagram at whatthefringe_productions and find us online at whatthefringeproductions.com. So you've put together your Fringe show, you've got all the marketing done, you are ready. Except for one thing, you gotta put a program together. So you whip out something super quick, and it isn't until after the Fringe closes that you realize.
I've definitely written my bio like a grant application.